Today on A Couple of Pointers podcast, we're lucky enough to have John Small-Mountain with us, the CEO of Adapted Growth and the author of Selling from Scratch. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to be here.
And I love talking to you because you're my discovery guru. And how do you feel about that word guru? Not a good thing? Good thing? Okay. Context?
Intention is really what matters. And I know your intention is good. I can leave all my opinions about that word off to the side.
All right, fine. It's probably somewhere in Stanford's list of inappropriate words. But I want to talk to you about discovery. I think that you have a way of doing discovery, and I've obviously read the book and we've chatted for a lot. What, if you were to define or describe how you do discovery differently, what would be the main takeaways, like the main attributes of what's unique about your model?
Well, I think a lot of people, when they think about discovery, they might be thinking BANT or just like a black or white list of gens, right? Do they have enough head count? Are they at a revenue level? And one of the most impactful things I've learned on my journey was whenever I started working with my business partner and we were doing websites. We had a very particular way of how we wanted to do website work. And he would always tell me, hey man, it's not enough that they have a need. It's not enough that they have money. They have to want it the way we do it. So figure out how to qualify for that. And then we're off to the races. And so it took me a long time to kind of get behind that because coming from corporate environment, you always make the pitch, you always make the offer. You weren't terribly concerned about fit and alignment.
Yeah, just close deals and worry about the shit later.
Exactly right. Like, let them deal with it. Like, that's not my concern. But here, I am the project manager. I am the person they're going to be communicating with. And there was probably 4 or 5 deals that I shouldn't have closed, but my ego got in the way. I wanted to work on these deals, and they were nightmares because they didn't want it the way that we wanted it. And so when I work with marketing and advertising groups now, it's what does your method look like? And can you quantify that to your salesperson so that way they're bringing on really great people who want what you're actually delivering? Like the example that I always use is SEO versus PC. Yes, they're both growth-minded marketing, tactics and different things, but they have different half-lives. They have different ways of getting done. And if someone has an expectation that they're going to get PC and you sell them SEO, when they're mad, you've earned all their fury, right? Because you didn't really question enough to understand what they were really looking for. Because they're not going to show up and say, I want SEO, and have a really great understanding of what that is. So you need to understand where are they trying to go and why is that important and what are they concerned about? And that's what really great discovery is, in my opinion.
Well, I've never met anyone that kind of coaches more of qualifying out. Just like removing every kind of obstacle, every kind of barrier, having the most honest and open conversation about everything. The kind of conversation people should have had with their wife or their partner before getting married. It's just like everything on the table. My wife often says I conned her into this marriage. Now it's too late. I think she says it jokingly, right? But give us some examples of what your discovery or what your qualification calls might sound like.
Well, a lot of this starts with who do you really want to work with, right? And the smaller you are, especially like on the agency side, if you're doing creative work for people, if you're doing branding work, you really need people who are going to trust your process, right? And they're going to be on board with you because it's such a conceptual thing that you're delivering to them anyway. If it's forced, it's going to be a nightmare for everybody involved. So how can a salesperson come up and have these kinds of conversations when they're not the owner, the founder? And it really comes down to who do you not want to deal with and how do you view yourself and going back and doing all this marketing stuff of going back and talking to the best customers about what did you like, so that way you've got the best view of that possible, so that way when you're doing discovery you can be looking for that, not the thing that you want to be, but the thing that you actually are. So that's how you don't overset the expectations there. But if you're the small person and you're losing out to bigger, more established companies, talk about it. Hey, how important is it that you're working with someone that's really well established? You might lose some of the personalization, but is that important to you? Well, yeah, it's super important. We want to work with someone who's tried and true. Okay, cool. We might not be there. Can we talk about it? And then you get to have this really great discussion at a stage early enough that it can still be a concern versus waiting until you want them to sign, you've sent them a proposal, you're hounding them for them to sign the proposal, and they're looking for any reason that it doesn't make sense. Then it's a much bigger process to try to get them to detach from that, look at it honestly, and then potentially make a change. It doesn't normally happen. So when you can lead with that intention, know who you are and know why you're different, your discovery becomes much more about, are we aligned in how we want to get to where you're looking to go, versus, do you have enough revenue? Have you been in the space long enough? What are your goals over the next 90 days? And, okay, let's get there.
Yeah, I almost consider those superficial values of like, do they fit my ideal client profile in terms of size, weight, all of that kind of stuff, more to be like attraction in a relationship. Like there has to be attraction. It's a prerequisite for you to form a relationship, but it can't be what a relationship's based on. That's literally just what gets you in the door. And then it's a conversation. Are we aligned? Are we on morals, on values, on life goals, whatever else are the more important topics? But now that's a minefield. Am I going to my prospects and saying, hey, look, I'm pretty grumpy until I've had my first coffee in the morning. How do you feel about afternoon meetings? Yeah, good. And then another thing, like I'll never miss a meeting, but occasionally I'm a minute late. Right. I do try to stack my days back to back. Like, would you find that offensive? Like, how deep do you have to go before, disqualifying yourself?
This is, in my opinion, where it gets a little muddled between art and science, right? Because I'm a data-driven guy. I love looking at KPIs and numbers, and I would rather look at spreadsheets all day long and CRM data than, try to like force a fit. But there is a little bit of this, you have to be able to read the writing on the wall, right? Because there's multiple layers of communication. There's the verbal stuff, there's the nonverbal stuff, there's all of these things going on. So I don't think depending upon how small you are and depending upon what you want to go, be willing to die on is kind of what I talk about with my clients, then that's where you have to kind of make your own kind of personal decisions around that. Because what's important to you might not be important to anybody else. And that's okay, right? Because a lot of my clients are also still the founder and entrepreneur. So like, who do you want to work with, right? And who do you not want to work with? Because if you can't tell your salesperson that, it's going to be a nightmare for everybody involved. Now, one of my favorite projects was the owner was like, hey, they got to be able to pass the grab a beer test. And I said, okay, what's the grab a beer test? And he goes, well, if I wouldn't want to grab a beer with them, we're probably not going to get along, right? And on one side of this, I was like, man, I love this. I love that this guy has got a standard about who he wants to work with. On the data-driven side of it is, how do we qualify for that? Like, how do I encapsulate that in the simplest format ever? Do you think that this person is qualified around this thing that's important? It's very subjective.
And very subjective, because I'm going to say this very tongue-in-cheek. I don't know who this guy wants to grab a beer with. It could be some like extreme right-wing, crazy, I don't know what. And then like those are his people and that's who he wants to work with. Pretty hard to define from a business context. So how does this translate though down from founder-led sales to a sales team? Like how do you systemize an approach where say the team do have KPIs, they do have a quota, they may be slightly more inclined to try close a deal that isn't a perfect fit because it's client in the door.
Man, nobody at the heart of it really wants a bad fit, right? And I've never talked to an owner or founder who's like, John, I just want to close them because I just want the money, right? There's always this idea of like, it's going to be fine. They just need to give us a chance. And once we show them what we're capable of doing, everything is going to be fine. But like, you let enough foxes into the hen house, you don't have any hens, right? You don't have any eggs, you don't have any production, right? And that's how it is in marketing firms, right? When we're on social media and we look up agency life, right? You see, it's rough in some of these agencies, right? Because the agency guys have these big quotas and they're selling it. And it's kind of like in tech when you're selling off the roadmap, like, oh yeah, that's coming. It's coming. We don't have that feature yet, but it's on the roadmap. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The roadmap. Sure.
Yeah, you have the same thing with like marketing agencies, right? Are you guys going to be able to do X and Y? Oh yeah, for sure. Well, we don't actually do that. And then it's a huge problem. The first thing is you have to constantly be talking about alignment with your salespeople, right? And you have to be talking about the outcomes, right? I dabbled for a while in the high ticket area, right? And there were some less than reputable people selling offers in that area. I was thinking these people just need to know how to qualify, right? And that was not the case. They just wanted close rates above a certain percentage, and that was it. They didn't care about anything else, right? But in the agency world, like, you're going to have a relationship with this person. They're going to be okaying your creative thoughts about how they should be talking about their business, right? On everything from positioning to colors to brand to all these things.
Let me give you a practical example here.
Yeah, for
Some
sure.
some of our clients like to slightly micromanage the process more so than other clients. For example, one of our reps hasn't made calls in the morning, and we'll get a message from that client saying, is Jane working today? And other ones would maybe look at it at a weekly basis and say, hey, looking at your week this week, it was a little bit low. Is everything okay? And others might never look at the inputs and only ever look at the outcomes. And if the outcomes are low, they'll have a discussion around that. Like, there's different degrees.
Yeah.
Would you say that's something you need to find a fit for? Or that's something you would say, look, bring in clients, but you need just robust processes that they slot into so that there isn't a way to micromanage? Like, where do you draw this? How would you tackle something like that with one of your clients?
That's a really good question. I think because it's a great example, because you are going to have very different opinions about what people want as far as, account management and account check-ins and daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly kind of things. If you guys are known for not being the super high touch group, I would set an expectation around that. Like, I might not necessarily be like, now, if you call us on Thursday, it's going to be okay that we don't get back to you until Tuesday, right? Because no one appreciates that. But, when you're talking about who you are and why you're different and why you're able to charge what you're able to charge, hey, so this means that sometimes we're going to be heads down doing the work that we've agreed to, so you might not be hearing from us. What kind of cadence is important to you? Put it on them.
I love the way you word these things. So we are the high touch one. We kind of have a balance. Like, we are set up to take on the clients that really want intimate oversight as if this was their employee. However, we do get the ones that don't want that. And we're like, oh, this is nice. This is nice. We set up for the former, of course, but it is nice when it's not. And so these are the kind of things, like, how many of those questions, because like that's one of 30 attributes that would kind of define a good client. How long are your discovery calls? Would you go through, would you have these 30, bring up these 30 points?
I like a long discovery call personally, right? Because I want room to really understand what they're going through, what is going on. And I do believe that so much of the sell is made in that discovery call, right? If you do
it's all about
well,
discovery. 100%.
Everything else is easier. Right. So all these people
100%.
who want to make discovery like a 15-minute fix thing, and they're just doing BANT, and it's the most heavy-handed, like low EQ kind of call you can imagine. I don't even think you're doing yourself a favor for the next person you're going to hand that call off to, personally. Right.
Yeah. Listen, don't get me wrong. We do a lot of those 15 minutes call type things. However, in my mind, discovery is a bit more of a process through the sales cycle. And so that first 15 minutes is quite literally, do you have a problem that you want solved that looks and you'd like it solved kind of like how we solve it? Is it worth having a more detailed conversation? It's like, let's not dive into an hour-long meeting here if we don't need it. So that, for me, is the goal of a quick little 15, is, are we attracted to each other?
Yeah.
If yes, let's go on a date.
I think that really depends upon how you're sourcing your meetings, right? Like, I'm not doing a bunch of cold direct outreach currently, right? So I have stuff kind of coming in my direction. So I can have a little bit longer, hey, let's see if I can help you. And it's not as quite concerning because they're reaching out to me and it's not an outbound motion, right?
And they know you and they want your help.
Exactly, right? That's already been established. So I just get to come in and kind of see if there's a big enough need to really warrant my help, or maybe they just need a little tweak and, hey, here it is, go try this. And then if this doesn't work, then let's talk about it again. But most of my, 30 minutes at a minimum, in my opinion, right? And the greener the offer, the longer I want my discovery to be, right? Because then I can really go into trying some talking points and stuff. I'm working on a project right now. I'm the first salesperson who's not the founder. So I'm in the middle of trying to take all this knowledge he's accumulated and put it into a sales process and the questions that go along with that. And so my discovery calls are all super long because it's just like, hey, I want to learn how you do this. And then if there's some opportunity to work together, we'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, to me, the perfect, the two stages of a sales cycle that are critical. Discovery, for me, that's 70% of the sale is in the discovery. And then the stage before your proposal, where you're building a business case, where you're matching everything that you've discussed to how it will be done. And to me, those are often, when I see customers, those are the two shortest stages. If they're there, the discovery is 15 minutes, then they go to demo, and from demo, they go to proposal. nothing in between. I'm like, well, yeah, no wonder. Like you didn't even understand their needs in discovery, and then you didn't even address their needs in this stage after demo. You were basically just saying, hey, was that demo hot shit? Do you want this? Like, super try.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway. So you've got this concept in your book, the 7 reasons these deals fall through.
The big 7.
The big 7. Talk to me about these.
A handful of years ago, I was at a sales conference, and a guy gets up on stage, and he goes, guys, there's only 7 reasons why most deals don't close. And at this time, I had already launched my business, and I was helping people as a side hustle with CRMs. I wasn't a sales coach yet. This is way before anything I had now going on. But I had built a handful of CRMs, and I was like, let me go test this assumption, because this feels a little too much like a silver bullet territory. And so I had built probably, 15 or 20 CRMs for different people by that point. And so I still have access to all that data. And lo and behold, there was a lot of commonalities in why these deals didn't complete. And it didn't matter if it was a service waste company, if it was commercial insurance, you could see these common threads. And so piggybacking off of what I heard there, I did a deep dive. And then the part that was missing was this qualifying for like cultural fit is kind of how we talk about it now. Do they want it the way that you do it?
Yeah.
Do they like you being high touch? Do they want that low touch? Are they wanting you to show the work? Are they just paying for the outcomes and they could give a crap about everything else? Some of that is going to align with how you do the work and some of it won't. And the better job you can do of qualifying for that, asking questions about it, the easier everything else becomes after that. So the part that was missing was what I now call wild cards. Like, know who you are, know where you are in the market, know why people aren't ready to buy from you, know why you lose deals to these other competitors, so that way you can talk about them super early on to save yourself time is really the thing that I'm going for here. I spent way too much time trying to think that sales was all about trying to talk people into stuff. And I've had a huge shift, over the past 4 or 5 years around the idea of like, I don't want to try that hard. It usually goes bad whenever I try to talk someone into something that they don't want to do. I don't want to try that hard. And why don't I just make my life easy by finding people who are already ready for this and want it?
Yeah, rather deal with the living than trying to raise the dead. And I've adopted that in how I send off a proposal now. I send off a proposal. The only follow-up that they get from that proposal is a few days later, if they haven't responded, saying, hey, I just want to check that you actually received the proposal. Like, no time pressure. Yeah. I just want to know it's in your inbox and you're not sitting there going, when the fuck's Ricky going to get me this proposal? And then once I got the proposal, I'm like, you're an adult. You've got needs. You know everything that I can do to help you with it. This is on your timeline, like when you want to do it. I'm not going to sit there every week going, have you made a decision? Have you made a decision? Have you made a decision? Because if they don't want it, like, how's me hurrying them going to help anything?
Oh, like that is one of the biggest reasons why people lose deals. It's one of the big 7, right? It's this loss of momentum. And we're still super excited about it because it's tied to our revenue and our goals and our advancement. But we've gotten off of the call, right? It might have been a couple of weeks or a couple of days, and they have had the gravity of everything else in that business come back and show up in their face. And we're still super excited because this is all we do all day. And that mismatch in urgency and excitement can get misinterpreted and misread so easily, right? And you were saying it a second ago, you said after you send the proposal, you're only going to send one more email. Hey, did I get this? One of my favorite things to talk about is how easy it is to default to just following up via email and not taking every last bit of advantage we have whenever we're actually on a call or a video call with like a prospect. Because if we're talking to you and we get to that stage and you say, well, yeah, I'd like to see a proposal. Okay, Ricky, I'm going to put this thing together. I'm going to send it over to you. It might get there tomorrow morning because I want to make sure it's right. Is that okay? Sure. Cool. If I don't hear from you by the end of the day, is it safe to assume that like you didn't get it? And I get to have a really kind of quick conversation about a follow-up point past their follow-up point that I get to own, right?
Look, and we always obviously try to find out timings, right? So like, when do you need this by? Because if there's no urgency on their side, I also know like, we're in an exploratory phase, right? Like no decisions being made. But if I spoke to someone yesterday who's like, listen, we've got a conference, coming up in March. We need this person available to do follow-ups after the conference. Well, if they haven't made a decision by the end of this month, I know this isn't happening. And I might go back to them saying, look, I know you needed someone by the end of March. We're coming up to a deadline where we'd be able to practically deliver that. I just want to check, like, it may not be a priority for you. You might not want to go with us. I just don't want you to come back to me a week later saying, okay, let's go, and now we can't deliver. So
Oh,
I'd have
100%
those
agree.
kind of, but that's like a practical, beneficial follow-up saying, hey, we're reaching a deadline. You want to move beyond that deadline, that's fine. But it does change what we had discussed or proposed or were able to achieve for you by when we were able to achieve it. Like, none of that. Have you read Jolt Effect?
No, I haven't. Should I?
Mate, yeah, you're going to love it. You're going to love it. I know you're a big reader. So it's, what's his name? I think Ted McKenna and Dixon. The guys from Challenger Sale and Workforce.
Okay.
So they've come up with one of those reasons people don't buy. And their original concept was you had to deal with the status quo. Why change? And you had to overcome the fear of change. Now, there's a new element to it that once they've decided to change, or you've overcome the fear of change, then there's the fear of making a decision. And that's separate. That's about like personal responsibility for the decision and how to overcome those things. Anyway, we're getting very much off track. So do you know the 7? Like, what are these 7? So you mentioned loss of momentum.
Yeah, so the first one is always, I'm not sure I need this. Okay, perfectly great reason to say no to a product or service. But before I just accept this potentially automated response, let's have a conversation about who we are, who we help, what those things look like, and see if those things are on your radar, and then we'll have that discussion, right? Which is why you go for gaps and pains, and you lead with those kind of things, because that's typically what gets you in the call in the first place. So that's the first one. After that is, I'm not sure I can afford this. So you got to talk about money as soon as humanly possible, right? Because if you're, let's say you're doing an enterprise level sale, right? You might be talking to someone for years before you actually get that deal done. If they don't even see this as something worth spending money in, you're wasting your time, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can talk yourself into whatever you want to tell yourself that you're gonna be able to talk them into it, but like, once again, you're not putting yourself in a high ability to win percentage without talking about money. So we talk about money. The rest of it in my head, in the way that I group it, is I just call it the path to yes, right? So the path to yes is, who else you're talking to. Who else do we need to talk to for this to be heard? And like, everyone gets to be heard. Are you the decision maker, right? Are we cultivating a champion? Are we dealing with someone directly? Time, and what's going to get in the way, right? So the status quo, the time, right? Who else you're talking to? Is it competitive? Who else do we need to get invested in this conversation? And then also, can you help us get this across the finish line, right? Are you in that place of leadership or not? So if you're having conversations about this, and they're tied to your qualification structure inside of your CRM, you don't get ahead of yourself, right? If you're not talking about money,
these are good qualification conversations to have. Do you also have these as like the disposition for reasons for closed lost in your opportunities?
Yes. Yeah. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves, because if you don't make no readily, like a reasonable response, right? Because sometimes they can have it, or they can need it, and they can be able to pay for it, and it's still not going to get closed, right? And I'll see some of these sales teams, and they're not allowed to mark a deal as lost because it's a maybe, just not today.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Oh, fuck.
you're not helping anybody.
Yeah. I see that all the time. Like, nothing moves to closed lost. Everything just moves to not now. They said, look, not now.
Exactly.
They're going to hire
then your
someone
data
internally
sucks as well.
They're going to hire someone internally as opposed to outsourcing to us. But if that doesn't work out, they'll come back to us. And so they put that as not now. Like, no, that is lost. You lost that to the status quo. If they come back to us, it's a new opportunity.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, just from a data-driven perspective, right? If you don't ever close the lid on a deal because they told you no, and you're like, you know what, you're right. You actually don't need this. And if we tried to do this, it'd be a disastrously fit for you for these reasons. Like, your data is going to be, how long does it take to close a deal here? Well, we have no idea, because we just have 500 deals just like thriving out there in limbo, because we're hoping someday they're going to come back and close.
Do you know what I find the main reason to be? The main reason is I find it's the language, right?
Oh, interesting.
To me, it's all about the language. What's an opportunity? Like, we've grown up, we've used this word a million times, right? What's an opportunity? Well, an opportunity just means there's a chance in the future for something, for success with something, or whatever, however you define it. But that's an opportunity. When we say a deal, like, is there a deal here? You can say this deal is on hold. This deal is not happening. This deal is closed. A deal is a very finite, defined object, whereas an opportunity is a little bit broad in scope. And so I feel like that's why people never want to close opportunities. It goes against human nature, certainly a masculine quality in human nature as well, of just wanting options and opportunities as opposed to
That is really interesting. Like, I tend to think of maybe, right, because I talk a lot about personality, and I'm a very nerdy developer type, right? So I'm all about process and repeatability, and I want the data behind it. So it's easy for me to be like, okay, cool. Like, tell me no for now, because I don't want to waste my time, and I'd rather give you your time back, and we can talk about this when this makes sense. Like, knowing in the back of my head, I'm going to get really great data, right? Because one of the things that I have found is that when you can really make no okay, you can then get like a backstage pass as to why they told you no, which is great if you're trying to improve your offer, improve your targeting, improve your outreach. So when you can make that, like, hey, if this is not a fit, please let me know. Sure, absolutely. And then when they come up and they say, hey, this isn't a fit for us, okay, awesome, right? First of all, I hope you're getting the help that you need. Could you let me know what I missed?
Yeah.
Boom. Amazing.
So many don't do that. Like companies are still guessing pricing. They're like, and they're guessing their pricing based off, I sent the price out. Did they buy it or did they not? On average, I think most people aren't taking it because of price. So let's try a lower price. I think most people aren't taking it because let's try a lower price, as opposed to talking to all the people to say, hey, listen, I know there's no deal here. I'm not even offering to adjust my price here. I just would have loved to have known what figure I could have said that it would have been a no-brainer for you, that you think you would have said yes. Is there a number for that?
So I have a very real-life example that happened to me fairly recently, right? So this guy calls me, and he needs a CRM, and he wants to build some automations into his CRM, and we do a bunch of that stuff. So we're having the conversation, and the guy is, John, I'm not good with people, so I want all these automations. This is going to take me to the next level. He's got pain. He's all over the place. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? He's just dumping pain. This is going to be the easiest conversation of my entire career. And so I almost was like, you know what? I'm just not going to talk about money. I'm just going to keep going. And then I was like, you know what? Every time you do that, John, that doesn't go well. And this is happening inside of my head while I'm having this call with this gentleman. Yeah. And I was like, okay, can I recap what I said? Just to make sure I'm on the same page with you. And he's like, yeah, please, right? So I'm like, you said this. He's like, yeah, John, this is all correct. I was like, cool. Can we talk about money for a moment? And he was like, yeah. I said, I know it's not super comfortable, but I found it doesn't serve us if we're not on the same page. A build like this, because it's just you, right? Your small organization is going to start at $1,500 is what I said, right? Because that's where our CRM builds start because of everything that comes with it. And he goes, and I said, that sounds like that maybe wasn't in the ballpark. And he goes, will you do it for 500? And I said, no, unfortunately I won't. And he goes, why not? And I said, well, because I told you, based upon this conversation, I know where you are, right? This is what it's going to take to do the job well. It's going to be this. It's like, will you do it for less? I said, no, man, unfortunately I can't. And he was like, okay, let's talk again next week. And I was just like, what are we going to talk about next week? Right? We're kind of at an impasse here. And he goes, okay, well, let me think about it and I'll let you know. And I was like, okay, right, totally fine. And that was it. But imagine the other side of that. If I had just leaned into my ego and like avoided the uncomfortable moment and just been like, you know what, this guy gets it. He really wants this thing, right? I would have set myself up to get ghosted, to get no response, to do all these things that everyone like has to deal with because I avoided the most important part of that conversation.
I tell every single person on our discovery calls, I tell everyone the price. Every single person the price and the price range. Hopefully they understand a little bit why. And, that kind of gives us a very good idea. And in fact, I don't even tell them at the end. It's not like, I wait right till the end because I want some time to work out afterwards. So I tell them like towards the very beginning, right? Like, hey, this is the kind of service. This is what we do. We are not a leads generation company. We're a company that takes away all your pain and headache of hiring, training and trying to maintain and retain an SDR. We do all of that for you as a service, but we will hire the same kind of and same caliber person that you would be hiring in-house if you had the option. So we are, this is kind of our price range. We're hiring in-country, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the kind of budget that you are looking for this kind of a role? And when they're like, oh, mate, we are like, I said, I'll always go and say, look, there's a few different options now. Either the only way to bring that down, because we're employing in the US or in Australia, where there's like, high rates, the only way to bring that down is to employ out of the country. You can look at, I don't know, Colombia, Manila, India. Pointer doesn't do that, but that's a really great way to cheaper. Is that something you're willing to do? And they're like, no, we don't want that. We only want in-country. And then I'll go and say, look, well, then you can't do this with human resources. Like, there's no ways to pay below what a minimum wage is for a person to do the job.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to look at email or LinkedIn or other channels that isn't so human resource intensive? And then the conversation will just be about email. But like, if I hadn't brought that up to begin with, I'd still be fucking selling outbound SDR services for the next 30 minutes, which would just end nowhere. So I even got to like categorize them early on. So go like, what?
Yes.
You know, because they might come to me saying they want an SDR, but nobody wants an SDR. What people want is top of funnel leads, or what they want is to understand their market message fit. You know, or what they want is to find a repeatable sales process. Like, these are the things they want. And SDR is maybe their best guess at how to do it. So I'm still trying to even work out, like, do they even know what they want? Anyway, but people who avoid pricing fucking blows my mind. Blows my mind why they don't discuss it early on.
Yeah. I mean, I get that it's uncomfortable, right? And this is where all my other stuff comes into play, right?
But let's be honest, is it uncomfortable? Like, for a salesperson, is talking about price genuinely uncomfortable? There's a lot of uncomfortable shit salespeople have to do. Is talking about price one of them?
Now, yes, to certain salespeople, right? Because this is where personality comes into play, right? Because, you know, some people love conflict, right? And they're that kind of person who loves to challenge people and, you know, and do that kind of thing, because that's just who that is. And that's a lot of what kind of like traditional salespeople were, right? You go find that person who's so eager to motivate that you're going to throw some money at them and they're going to go be that hard charger and ask all the hard questions and save everyone a bunch of time. Well, that has to move away from we have to move away from that a little bit, right? Because now everything is more relationship driven, everything is connected. So if you see talking about money as conflict, because that's how you've been raised and your personality re-engages all of that stuff, your default is to not talk about it, right? And it's not, you know, until you meet someone like us, right? And it's like, hey, you need to talk about money because, hey, you know what? First of all, you can. Did you know that you're actually allowed to qualify for money in like a pretty early stage conversation just to make sure that you're not wasting their time? Half of the stuff that I teach people, it's almost like, it feels weird to me because I have the curse of knowledge now, but I'm like, how do you not know that you can go have this conversation with people? Well, John, because I didn't think that was allowed. You're allowed to like ask anything in a conversation as long as you have an agreement that makes that conversation topic okay. So if you're uncomfortable talking about money, build an agreement. Ricky, we're going to have to, you know, spend a little bit of time talking about money at some point in this conversation. I know it's uncomfortable for both people sometimes, but just to kind of make sure that we're on the same page, if it gets a little bit uncomfortable, is that going to be okay? Now you have an agreement. And now when you say, well, can we talk about the investment to kind of make all that stuff go away? Now, if you're uncomfortable, it's on you. And that's where mindset shifts have to happen, and coaching and training become really important. Because
coaching and training.
You know, if you're this out of the box, blunt, kind of heavy-handed person, great, yeah. Tell them to go talk about money, they're going to go do it. Probably badly, because they're not going to have all like the EQ to kind of do it well. But every personality brings some greatness to the sales role, and it also is going to create some challenges because there's balance in all of these things. Yeah,
amazing, man. Every time I talk to you, I'm just like, this is why I listened to John Small Mountain about discovery. Right? Like, every single time. If somebody wants to read your book, I mean, I know it's a little bit of a silly question. Where do they find it?
It's on Amazon. We have the audiobook version. It's one of the coolest things I've gotten to do is feel like I'm like a recording artist and recorded it here in my house. So we have the audio version. We have the print version. If you'd like a signed version, send me an email, john@adaptedgrowth, and we can get you one in the mail.
And I listen to the audio version. It's going to sound weird, but I listen to it in the shower. And what a great listen. Like, I was sitting there showering, like going over disc profiles and like, how can I incorporate this? Was just such a good listen. And if somebody just wants to, I don't know, get a little bit closer to your magic, learn a little bit more about what you do, or just have an opportunity to engage in conversation with you without paying you as a coach yet, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, this is my other kind of secret project, if you will, right? I've been building a community in Slack, and it is filled with really awesome people. There's no charge to come hang out, but if you're an entrepreneur or a salesperson who wants to be consultative in your approach, if you're a creative and you're thinking about how do I sell this thing that I want to go do, send me a message on LinkedIn, Twitter, everything is at Small Mountain. We can get you into the community. There's about 115 really awesome people. Ricky hangs out there sometimes. There's a bunch of other sales coaches as well, because I'm not it for everybody, and that's okay. But that is a really cool place to do some networking, test some ideas, test some messaging, and be around some other really high-performing people. So it's probably the best way to come hang out.
I really love that community because, it's not, there's the communities that are like 20,000 plus, great for selling to other sellers. Whereas your community is just people like genuinely trying to get consultative and advice in their process. I've seen like discovery calls being dropped there saying, how did I do? Hey, who wants to practice some disco questions? Just what do you think of this email? What do you think of the language? Just so much great advice from people who have no interest in the outcomes other than them trying to support you and hoping that you'll support them in return when they need help. It's a fantastic community.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It's been like after the audiobook, it's probably the thing I'm most proud of.
Yeah, you've collected a group of extraordinary individuals.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. And thanks for hanging out in there. You're quiet and you lurk, but you always bring the heat when you have something to say.
Right, I made a mistake. I made a classic outbound mistake, in fact. I went wide instead of deep. And so if you look at the sidebar of my Slack channel, I don't know, like 30 fucking communities. And I can pop in and see if the keywords that I mentioned were listed or something like that. Whereas what I'm in the process of doing is culling it down to 4 or 5.
Wow.
And, just spend meaningful time in a few communities, all of which like serve a particular need for me.
Yeah, I'm in a very similar spot. I was in a bunch of paid communities, right, by other sales coaches and sales consultants, and I was just I wasn't hanging out there, and I wasn't really getting the value. I canceled a couple of those memberships. I exited a couple of groups because, much like you, I've got this greatness of the Sherpa community, and everyone has got really deep relationships there. And I was kind of feeling like, man, if I'm not going to be all the way here, I probably don't need to be here at all.
Yeah. Amazing community. At Small Mountain, reach out to John if you want to get involved. Definitely get his book. And if you need someone to help your organization with discoveries in particular, I'm sure you got a lot of other talents. You've mentioned CRM. And just on that, the other thing that I found so interesting about your CRM builds is you're one of the only people that I know in a professional capacity who will not make the same CRM recommendations as everyone else. You say like, these overpriced, overpaid platforms, yes, they're nice, but you do not need them. And you can get 100% effective, efficient, and successful sales process going with the tools like Pipedrive, Go High Level, just things that are like much easier to, attain and maintain. And I love that. I think there's just such a need for that, and not everyone has to move on to HubSpot or Salesforce.
Not everyone does, and it's like, that's why I got into this thing, because I was reading about all this really cool tech and hearing about really cool tech at the enterprise level. And I was like, man, everybody needs this. That way salespeople don't just keep lying to themselves. You know what? Screw that guy. He didn't know what he wanted. You can only say that to yourself so many times as a salesperson before you have to look back and be like, you know what? I'm the common denominator in all of those conversations. So maybe it's a little bit me. I don't know. But if you don't have a CRM that's holding that data, and if you're not like building a culture of coaching and encouragement of like, hey, why'd you lose? How do we improve next time? As opposed to don't lose that deal. Like that, like one is creating the opportunity to go back and be reflective and make improvements. And the other one is just creating perfection syndrome, right? And no one wants to show up and be honest when there's this weight that you can't be wrong.
And building up a middle funnel that is so unmanageable that your whole funnel breaks under the weight. Right? Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank
and
you,
I'll obviously see you again soon in the community. And anyone listening to this, I highly encourage you, get involved. There are a few people out there that I feel bring genuinely unique, well thought out, and just brilliant concepts to sales professionals. And John is one of them. John, thanks for being on the show. We'll chat to you again soon.
Thanks for having me.